Also in this week, as we were considering using games in the classroom, I also wanted to consider using simulations in the classroom. There are some similarities between games and simulations, but there are also some distinct differences. And as I've mentioned before in the other methods, that I try to use a pedagogical example so that I can bring in teachers across the curriculum as well as across grade levels so that they can experience the method, and then we can kind of pull back and take a look at some of the specifics. For this particular simulation, I was using something that every perhaps first year teacher dreads dealing with, kind of like management, and that is engaging in the parent conference. So what I did here is I developed different scenarios. This was the problem or the issue, and some context about the home life, and took a couple of students out in the hall and explained that to them. However, the teacher did not know. I mean, they knew the context, obviously, because you as a teacher would know the context of the problem. But this was not a scripted simulation. So this was one that could kind of flow and allow the conversation to unfold. I didn't want to give, obviously I wanted the future teacher candidate who was playing the teacher in this particular simulation to think on their feet and be able to react. You know, this was a very low risk. Yeah, you may say some things that you should never say in a teacher conference, or you may say some brilliant things that you should always say in a teacher conference. But the bottom line is I would rather you experience that here in the classroom in a safe zone rather than say those things in your actual first teacher conference. So it was one of those opportunities for them to engage with each other. Obviously, if you're the parents or parent of this particular student, you had a little bit more of a free flow of how you wanted to present your ideas, how you wanted to react to the parent. And it really worked well as we went through these different scenarios. So the key is always in the processing. And what we would do is I gave them a process sheet during the acting of these different scenarios, and we would, at the end of each, think, okay, what did you see? Or they could do it as the scenario unfolded. Certainly that was the student's prerogative when they had the process sheet, that they could watch the scenario and the simulation unfold, and they can write down, oh, that was a good idea, this is a good do, this is a good don't. And then at the end of the simulation, we would give feedback to the teacher. These are some of our ideas. Really thought you did this well. These are some things to consider. And then, of course, there is no perfect, probably parent-teacher conference format, but there's some obvious do's and don'ts, and that's kind of what I wanted them to understand and flesh out as we went through these different simulations. So the next slide really is about the process sheet. You can see the process sheet's very simple. It's kind of a graphic organizer design where students can write down what they thought were good things that happened during the simulated teacher conferences, and some of the things that they thought maybe challenges, or maybe even had just questions about. I think that was the key, since there is no perfect format for a parent-teacher conference, just because there are so many different scenarios. You don't know some of the family context that, and like I said, these are really gave the improv opportunity for those who were role-playing the parents or the parent in these particular simulations to take the conversation in one direction or the other, just to see how the teacher candidate or the person who's role-playing the teacher would handle that. So they're really, it may be a series of questions. Okay, is this a do, or is this a don't? And we can clarify that as we process it at the end. So this processing sheet was something the students had as the simulations unfolded. I only had 3 simulations because I had a relatively small class. If I'd had a larger class, I would have created more simulations so every student could participate in a role play and experience this. If I would even give them the option, if they wanted to reverse roles afterwards and see if they could play the teacher with that particular scenario, I gave them that opportunity as well. Obviously, time was not necessarily my adversary, so I allowed them to explore and experiment with it. That's something that you may not have the opportunity to do in your classroom as you use simulations. But the key here is to have a way of processing that simulation either during or after the conclusion of the simulation. And then what we did at the very end, I had summarized a slide that basically provided a collective summary of the research regarding teacher and parent conferences, and as we processed some of the questions that they had as the simulations unfolded, we looked at the list and suggested that this is why this would be a good idea to include this in a conference, and this is why you leave this particular issue out of the conference. So it gave us a chance to process not only what happened in the simulation, but connect it to the research as well. So there's an extension to this. And as with games, simulations are excellent methods to engage the type 1 learner, for them to experience something that is real world and something that they can process and then apply later. And it's also good for type 3 learners, those that want the application. Okay, so I've learned all this. How can I apply it to my particular profession in the future? It's kind of like an experiment. Before you go into a lab for a chemical company or whatever, you want to have a controlled experiment in the laboratory so you can understand the do's and don'ts of that, and that's really what a simulation can provide in the human experience as well, as it gives you a controlled experiment that when you get ready to take it to your own classroom or whatever, you will have at least experienced something similar to it, and maybe you can draw from that. So that's the idea of the simulation method, so that students can experience and then think about the level of application.